we're going to talk about Anna Sarwar, who is Scottish Labour's leader. So Scotland has their own Labour Party, and so they're not the same party that Keir Starmer is in charge of, but they are related. And they often lose to the SNP, which is Scotland's national party. Anyway, so this isn't the same as Keir Starmer coming out and saying something, but it's still not good. And he says Scottish Labour wouldn't support the gender recognition bill now in a U-turn. He says he outlined his regrets that the Scottish Labour previously supported the gender recognition reform bill. Knowing what we know now, we would not have supported the bill, he told Holyrood Sources podcast in a screeching U-turn. Knowing what you know, what do you know now? So, just a quick summary. In the UK, in order to change your birth certificate and a few other things, like to get a marriage certificate, to get a death certificate, that kind of stuff, you need to get a gender recognition certificate. Already this seems complicated and pointless, because why can't you just update those things in the first place? But this is the tip of the iceberg. Gender recognition certificate, I needed to send off like 45 pages. I needed a description of my genitals. I needed a description of my fashion choices. I needed like a full medical history, like an insane amount of stuff. A signature from a solicitor I'd never met. Like just so many things. It's completely stupid. And so we were pushing for that to get reformed. In England and Wales, they were going to reform it, and then the gender critical movement happened, and then they didn't. They didn't have any reason why they didn't do it, but because it was politically good to attack trans people, they did that. But Scotland is generally more left-wing than the rest of the UK, and they have their own control over their own gender recognition bill, and so they actually passed the reform and said we're going to reform it. And for the first time ever, the wider UK government, which is England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, the overarching government stepped in and overruled Scotland's own decision for the first time ever, specifically to stop trans people from updating documents slightly easier, so they didn't have to have some man they'd never met review their fashion choices, which is something I actually had to submit, by the way. This man who I met for 5 minutes said that I had very convincing feminine accessories, and it's like fucking absolute joke. So the government risked causing a international diplomatic incident over making that different because the media and fucking bullshit. And but Scotland passed it, the UK overruled it, and then they just gave up because fuck trans people, who cares? And he's saying, knowing what we know, what do you know now? What has changed? I mean, maybe if you were going to say, if we knew the UK government was going to try and, ruin Scotland's autonomy over its own laws, then we wouldn't have caused a fuss or something pathetic like that. Or maybe you could say, seeing that they've passed this exact bill in 20 plus other countries, here's some new data that we actually have some actual data showing that it would be a problem. No. You don't have that because there isn't any data showing that, because every single country that has passed a bill like this has had no issues at all. Like, that is just a fact. That is just a observable fact of every single country that has passed this. There has been no problems with it.
Okay.
Of course, because why would there ever be a problem? Like, you're like, oh, what if a criminal Why would a criminal update their fucking birth certificate when they can commit the crime without their birth certificate? It makes no sense at all. Like, the whole premise of opposing this is nonsense. Like, complete nonsense. Anyway, he's obviously decided that he's gender critical now, or it's politically beneficial for him to hate trans people. And so he's just been like, fuck it. Fuck trans people. Gender critical's what I'm doing now. And he's just going to lie. He's just going to make it up. Knowing what we know now, what? He's never going to say, because they haven't learned anything new. There's no evidence to oppose the Gender Recognition Act reform at all, and that's why they never give any. They do these ridiculous hypotheticals, and, oh, we're concerned about women's safety in general, but they never say something like, in Germany, which passed this law 6 years ago, the amount of trans people committing crimes is gone up by 5, or the number of cis people changing their birth certificate in order to burglarize something has gone up tenfold. Like, because they don't have any data. They have nothing. Literally nothing to oppose this at all. It's what they have is they have all the power and they have the media, and that's all they need. They don't have any rational arguments. They don't have any data. They don't have any statistics. They don't have literally nothing. Anyway, this whole thing is very frustrating, and I've talked about it for years. So yeah, the reform would have allowed trans people to change the thing. They love this phrase self-identify, but like, so what does that even mean? I mean, what does self-identify even mean? Like, you would still have to fill in a form and get the government to approve it. And that's what you have to do today, and that's what you'd have to do then. Only today, you have to get a whole range of men that you've never encountered before to tick a box, and you have to pay them to do it, or to write a little report saying that actually they found you quite attractive, or to write a full description of what your genitals are like, because why that affects anything? Like, how is that related? Bullshit. So he says he did not regret supporting Holary's gender reforms, but insisted tighter curbs on sex offenders should have been introduced. They love to... Oh, then this line says, Scottish Labour did not put forward any amendments relating to sex offenders at the time. Because they're just making it up. It's just politically relevant for them to hate trans people now, so they're just going to say all the things they need to say. It's so easy for them to sell this like fear-mongering around trans people and sex offenders. Oh, imagine if there was a trans person who was a sex offender. Should they have human rights? Oh yeah, maybe we shouldn't give any trans people human rights. That's a good point. It doesn't affect it. Like, a sex offender, regardless of whether they're trans or not, goes to prison. Ideally, should go to prison, though if they're a cis man, they usually don't. But if they go to prison and they're a danger to the other prisoners, they're not going to be put in with the general population of prisoners, or they certainly shouldn't be. And whether they're trans or not shouldn't affect that at all. It should be the exact same protocol for everyone. Someone who is a rapist isn't a worse rapist if they're trans. If they're a danger to other prisoners, they're not a worse danger to other prisoners if they're trans. Whether or not they have a gender recognition certificate doesn't make them worse or less bad. It's completely meaningless. If someone is a sex offender, and you're like, oh, well, should they really be given the privilege of being able to change they should have the same human rights as everyone else, but they should just be put in a position where they can't be a harm to anyone else in society. Like, you shouldn't be, should sex offenders really have access to, like, heart surgery? Should they really have access to, like, insulin? Well, yeah. I happen to believe that we shouldn't be doing cruel and unusual punishments on people in prison just because they're horrible people who have done horrible things. Going to prison is the whole point. Like, that's the punishment. If someone has diabetes, you shouldn't be like, oh, well, we should have tighter regulations on sex offenders having access to insulin. Why? Are you taking insulin away from all the other sex offenders? No. Are you removing the legal documents of all the other sex offenders? No, you're not. It's just completely orthogonal nonsense. You just know that if you say sex offenders and trans people in the same sentence, loads of people's brains just shut off and go into autopilot and start going, oh yeah, trans people are sex offenders, oh, trans people are sex offenders, or just complete bullshit. There's no statistics here showing that in any country in the world ever who has allowed trans people to update their documents slightly easier than the UK, which is most of them where you can do it. None of them show that there's anything to do with sex offenders, no increase in sex offences or people getting away with sex offences, or people in prison suddenly being empowered to hurt their other inmates. It just makes no sense at all. Anyway, looking back, the deep regret that I have is that we actually didn't push harder on the amendments that we had as the conditions for supporting the bill. As they say, he didn't offer any. And we took at face value the Scottish Government on the record. They said that nothing in the legislation would negatively interact with the Equality Act. Which it doesn't. That's just factually true. And he also, here we go. He also pledged support for nurse Sandy Peggy, this one, who has been harassing Dr. Beth Upton and caused a big scene because she had to exist alongside a trans person. There's a couple of videos on my channel about that already. If you would like a summary, you can go check it out. But this is just the current gender critical thing. It's a cis woman who is an anti-trans activist who doesn't think trans people should be able to use the facilities at work. And of course now the Scottish Labour leader is supporting her. So he is just out and out gender critical, anti-trans campaigner who wants to remove rights from trans people. This doctor who has never done anything wrong, she's literally just done her job. She's just a doctor and she's been raked through the media over nothing. And now the fucking leader of the Scottish Labour Party is taking the side of someone who admitted to harassing her colleague. It's just disgusting how little support we have in the UK from politicians and from the media. Like, they do not give a fuck. It's like if you went into work and you harassed your colleague because they were from another country or gay or something, you might get away with it because racism and homophobia definitely exist in this country. You might not. But what you are very unlikely to do is to get the leader of the fucking Scottish Labour Party backing you up after you admitted in court that that's what you had done. Like, these people, like, he doesn't even think that trans people are fucking human. Like, it's just disgusting. Anyway, there's a summary on that here. So then he said, this isn't about a government issuing guidance and then a health board choosing to follow the guidance or not follow the guidance or interpret the guidance. This is about following the law, the actual law, and the Equality Act is very clear. It is. And the Scottish NHS has been following it, as has loads of other organisations in the country. So this actually undermines the argument, which is around how do we challenge transphobia and how do we make sure we're also challenging misogyny and sexism at the same time? Yeah, they're not in conflict in the slightest. That isn't what's going on here at all. What's going on here is someone being transphobic, you blindly defending them, you saying that trans people shouldn't be able to update their legal documents in a sensible way at all, and then not giving any reason for it at all, and then lying about the Equality Act. He then says, because there's a failure to respect the equality. What are you talking about? In the Equality Act, explicitly says that trans people are allowed to use the facilities of their actual sex. There is no robust action from the government who are actually notified about this and didn't take meaningful... What kind of meaningful action? Do you want the government to ban trans people from using the toilet at work? Is that what you're calling for? Yeah, I mean, that is the only possible thing you can be calling for here. If we are going to stop falling into divisive culture war politics, like... What are you... unbelievable. Like, this is literally all you're doing, mate, you stupid fucking prick. Just unbelievable. This is literally it. You're picking the fucking gender critical shredding a trans person flavour of the month, blindly defending them, saying, I oppose reforming the Gender Recognition Act for literally no reason at all. I mean, that's what culture war politics, that's what it is. That is literally all it is. If we're going to make sure we're making progress as a nation, and we've got to say quite clearly, we support single-sex spaces based on biological sex. Yeah, so we respect the Equality Act. So just, again, to be clear, the Equality Act explicitly protects trans people with or without a gender recognition certificate to use the correct spaces. Like, that is literally in the Equality Act. They would have to change the Equality Act to remove that part. So this guy, leader of the Scottish Labour Party, is straight up lying about what the Equality Act says. Like, just factually wrong. And then he is, again, straight up calling for the gender critical dog whistle, barely even a dog whistle at this point, saying we support single-sex spaces based on biological sex. What he means is sex at birth, and what he means is trans people shouldn't be able to use the toilet at work. Like, that is what he is calling for. the leader of the Labour Party in Scotland. It's just so extreme. This is a situation we've got to. Fortunately, I don't think the Labour Party are in power in Scotland at the moment. How are we going to find out? Seats, maybe? Oh, this is probably what we want. Yeah, whatever. Scottish Labour 22, Scottish National Party 62. Yeah, so they are the third biggest party. But obviously the Conservatives aren't going to be defending trans people's rights. And obviously Alba aren't either. They're the far-right party in Scotland. The SNP has generally been positive for trans people, but it's pretty bleak. So if you're a trans person in Scotland, beware that the leader of the Labour Party there is gender critical and wants to change the Equality Act, is lying about the Equality Act, and wants to ban trans people from using the toilet, changing rooms, whatever, at work. Want someone like me to not be allowed to go to the toilet. So he is a lying dickhead. In fact, you know what? Callback. If you're watching this as a clip, this is a callback to a previous video that you need to go and watch. But he is dishonest, dishonourable, undisciplined, immodest, and lacks integrity. He can fuck off.